Good morning, everybody. My name's Debbie and I'm a member of Christ Central. So this morning I'm reading from the book of Esther and it's chapter 2. I'm using the NLT version and I'm starting at verse 12. So here we go. Before each young woman was taken to the king's bed, she was given the prescribed 12 months of beauty treatments. 6 months with oil of myrrh, followed by 6 months with special perfumes and ointments. When it was time for her to go to the king's palace, she was given her choice of whatever clothing or jewelry she wanted to take from the harem. That evening, she was taken to the king's private rooms, and the next morning, she was brought to the second harem, where the king's wives lived. There she would be under the care of Shaashgaz, the king's eunuch, in charge of the concubines. She would never go to the king again unless he had especially enjoyed her and requested her by name. Esther was the daughter of Abihail, who was Mordecai's uncle. Mordecai had adopted his younger cousin Esther. When it was Esther's turn to go to the king, she accepted the advice of Hegai, the eunuch in charge of the harem. She asked for nothing except what he suggested, and she was admired by everyone who saw her. Esther was taken to King Xerxes at the royal palace in early winter of the 7th year of his reign, and the king loved Esther more than any of the other young women. He was so delighted with her that he set the royal crown on her head and declared her queen instead of Vashti. To celebrate the occasion, he gave a great banquet in Esther's honor for all his nobles and officials, declaring a public holiday for the provinces and giving generous gifts to everyone. Even after all the young women had been transferred to the second harem, and Mordecai had become a palace official, Esther continued to keep her family background and nationality a secret. She was still following Mordecai's directions, just as she did when she lived in his home. So these few verses form just a small but pivotal part of Esther's story. Esther is a Jewish girl, originally named Hadassah, an exile in a foreign land. And the book recounts that she ends up being in a place of influence with the highest person in the land, the Persian king Xerxes I. These verses are significant in that this is when the king meets Esther and her beauty entrances him, leading to her eventually being in a place of powerful influence. She is chosen to take nothing with her from the harem to enhance her attractiveness, but that which Hegai, the king's eunuch in charge of the harem, advised. The main theme of this book is that God is at work behind the scenes in the lives of these characters. God is not actually mentioned by name in the book, but it is evident that his divine purpose to save the Jews is at work through all these events. In all the decisions and details, he is working out his purpose. He uses the actions of the king to fulfill a purpose in his greater plan. Now think what Esther was faced with. She was young, she was foreign, lacking experience, and in the natural, these things really seemed to act against her. What a woman she was. Esther was not only beautiful, but a woman of honor. The king was searching for a new queen, and in the process was completely dishonoring all the young women who were brought to him. after being stripped of their virginity, they were cast aside to effectively be sex slaves without the title or privileges of queen or wife. Esther had no control over what was happening to her, but she took control of her responses with humility and grace. It was her character that gained the favor of those in authority, and in turn the king. She chose not to try to manipulate the king, but to trust in God. She wisely listened to her cousin's counsel and kept her identity hidden. Her cousin Mordecai was a God-fearing man who had raised her as his own daughter. Esther courageously entered the harem to endure the beauty regime there. God used her physical beauty and her godliness to attract the king. She lived as a prisoner, really, but courageously spoke out at the right time, as the book goes on to show, thus being pivotal in the salvation or saving of her own people. Could she ever have imagined that scenario? Would anyone have foreseen that possibility? So this story reminds us that with God, anything is possible. And he has a habit of using the least likely people in the eyes of the world. This is one of my favorite books in the Bible. It has secrecy, immorality, drunkenness and debauchery. This is not why it's my favorite. Intrigue, spying, murder, the lot. But it also has courage, wisdom, favor, selflessness, and triumph. And God is in it all. Each one of us can turn this story back to ourselves and ask, why am I here in this place at this time? God, what are your purposes in my life? And how do you want me to respond? At the moment, with all these greater restrictions on our lives, it does seem harder to find that place of influence. But this orphan Jewish girl, centuries ago, living as an exile in a foreign land, wouldn't have easily imagined a place of influence either. It just reminds us that nothing's impossible with God. So as we go into our prayer time now, let's pray around these two questions. Why have you put me here in this place at this time, Lord? And what are your purposes, Lord, in my life, and how do you want me to respond? Thank you.